Greetings, everyone. This is Mehl-Madrona speaking to you on behalf of my colleagues, Barbara Mangy and Patrick McFarlane. Our affiliations are listed below. Barbara and I are with Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness. Patrick is with Northern Light Family Medicine Residency. We have nothing to disclose, and this is how you can reach me. And I'm happy to connect you with my colleagues if you will reach out to me. And this is a picture of Barbara on the right and our favorite 14th century castle on the left. So we want to thank Albert Marshall for originating the idea of two-eyed seeing and promoting it among scholars and intervention programs. Albert is a Mi'kmaq elder from Eskasoni First Nation in Nova Scotia. The Mi'kmaq are part of the Wabanaki, which consists of the Mi'kmaq, the Maliseet, the Passamaquoddy, the Penobscot, and the Abenaki. These are the people of the dawn. And I acknowledge that I speak to you from their unceded territory and pay tribute to their elders past, present, and future. I'm also grateful to CFHA for allowing me to speak. So the word in Mi'kmaq is Eptuaptamunk, and it refers to being able to have more than one perspective at the same time. And it was really born in the fall of 2004 at Cape Breton University in Sydney, Nova Scotia, as a collaboration between Albert and his wife, Merdina, and scientists in that university. So the notion is that Indigenous knowledge is as valuable as other knowledge systems, that it's not to be dismissed, but should be held in equal regard to conventional scientific knowledge. And of course, two-eyed seeing can apply to any marginalized population, including voice hearers, immigrants, homeless people, whomever have a voice that's been silenced, can know things and know things in a valid way and need acknowledgement of their knowledge systems. So two-eyed seeing helps us to appreciate the wisdom of the Indigenous world and other epistemologies to complement the contemporary scientific approach. And of course, the kind of exploitive, environmental destroying approach of modernist capitalism may need to be tempered by the wisdom and philosophy of Indigenous people if humans are to survive. So implicit in Eptuaptamunk is the idea that we leave the world a better place for the generations to come. This is a picture of Albert. He's a little bit older than this now. Another important Mi'kmaq word is Netukalimk, and it's the idea that humans are interdependent and interconnected with the natural and the spiritual world. So it emphasizes these concepts of coexistence and enlarged community. And so Indigenous ethics considers all beings and not just human beings. So two-eyed seeing consists of the idea that we should always be looking for another perspective and a better way to do things. This is the website where it originated at Cape Breton University, Integrative Science and Health. And the idea, of course, is that Indigenous knowledge comes from consensus-driven systematic observations of how things work, and that these observations result in explanations that are useful and appealing, even if they do not make sense to the dominant paradigm. It's the opposite. Indigenous philosophy is the opposite of positivism, which is the idea that there is one cause and the scientific method will discover it. And also, it excludes the idea of positivism that there's only one good explanation that precludes all other explanations. It's the opposite of reductionism. Not all explanations need to be microstructural. And of course, common examples, we may know much about the neural circuitry involved in depression and the related neurochemicals, but that is not necessarily a good explanation for why being in relationship and talking together within that relationship makes me feel better. Similarly, we may know all the brain circuitry involved in meditation, but it doesn't explain its beneficial effects. So the idea is explanatory pluralism, that explanations can exist at multiple levels, and an explanation on one level need not be compatible or explainable by an explanation on another level. We choose explanations based upon their utility and aesthetics, recognizing that different explanations will work better for any given context and perhaps not in another context. So if we apply that to substance use and substance use treatment, then when we look at indigenous knowledge of disorders, we realize that all disorders are simultaneously physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and social, and that we must address all these dimensions simultaneously. And the notion of the medicine circle is familiar to everyone. It's symbolized by the horizon, and each direction informs us of virtues and values that need to be brought to bear to find wholeness and balance and harmony. And animals are useful metaphors for these virtues and attributes. So addiction is a story. It's a story we've learned that perhaps came out of historical and actual and intergenerational trauma, that came out of growing up around other people who are addicted. And as Leslie Marmo Silko says, I will tell you something about stories. They aren't just entertainment. Don't be fooled. They are all we have, you see, all we have to fight off illness and death. You don't have anything if you don't have the stories. This is from her marvelous book, Ceremony. And our focus then in using two-eyed seeing is to find stories, better stories for negotiating the human condition that do not include such reliance upon substances. And we know that Indigenous North Americans have high rates of substance use. And the reasons for this are often rooted in European contact, forced relocation, cultural genocide, and trauma, including unresolved grief. Many government policies have contributed to this, one of the most famous being the Relocation Act of 1956, which relocated individual people and families to job training centers in urban areas. The goal was assimilation. The result was greater economic instability, increased unemployment, homelessness, and disconnection from home community support networks. So not surprising that people in Indian country are distrustful of programs brought in from the outside. So what we need are programs that incorporate traditional practices, promote community involvement, and encourage healthy notions of Indigenous identity that increase well-being and healthy behaviors by reducing the stress that's linked to negative cultural identity and stigma, as well as increasing one's connections within the community. So inclusion of traditional healing practices is evidence-based and important. So there was a meeting in 2018 of key stakeholders to talk about the uptake of medication-assisted treatment programs among North American Indigenous people. And some themes emerged from this meeting that are important for us. The mismatch between Western secular and reductionistic medicine with the Indigenous holistic healing tradition, the need to integrate MAT and traditional healing, the conflict between MAT and the abstinence model that's sometimes prevalent in Indigenous communities, as well as systemic institutional barriers. So, so what came out as important were the need for adjunctive psychosocial counseling, coordination of care, educational interventions, and discussions of types of medications. So in this survey, it turned out that only 28% of 192 programs were providing MAT treatment, and that stigma was an important part of that. The idea that providing MAT is just replacing one drug with another and not viewing it as harm reduction. So dialogue was important. In our context, Indigenous people in Maine are often quite rural, and opiate use treatment was only available previously in a 2 to 4 hour driving distance from Maine's reservations. So here, with the help of Northern Light Health and the Family Medicine Residency Program, we implemented a consulting program called Makwi, which is from a Penobscot word meaning together. And the idea was to support the tribes and tribal related agencies to implement MAT, to provide consultation regarding the barriers to implementing MAT, to provide physician consultants, and to provide training in brief intervention and referral techniques, motivational interviewing, Indigenous approaches to counseling, education about co-occurring disorders, and co-occurring substance use, especially methamphetamine. So, so we did this through community meetings, talking circles, providing naloxone to community members, addressing stigma, focusing on community relationships and people's feelings about harm reduction and replacement therapy. And we provided training in Indigenous approaches to counseling for MAT and also suicide prevention training. So we were working within an ecological model in which the individual is embedded in a context of peers and family members, which is embedded in a context of tribe and community members, which is embedded in a larger society. And so this is another kind of medicine circle. And you can see that we're attempting to address stigma, state and national attitudes, media portrayals, cultural beliefs, tribal attitudes, through the involvement of community, peers, local legal authorities, personal situations, schools, parents, and the like. So our training programs were well received. 66% gave us a 4 rating on a 0 to 5 scale, and 19% a 5 rating. This is just a list of things that people decided they would change about their practice, and I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I think the important thing that kept arising was to ask more open-ended questions. And one of our guiding principles was that of humble inquiry, and which is a concept that comes out of a scholar at MIT and is similar to the way elders approach people. So the deep listening, the listening without judgment or interpretation, is an essential aspect of what elders do. And so, so more empathy and less judgment, improving listening skills, paying more attention, changing verbiage, being mindful of body language, more awareness of how Indigenous traditions intersect with conventional treatment models, looking for smaller signs of progress. These are some of the things that people plan to change in their practice as a result of the trainings that we provided. So, so when we began, MAT, these are our sites, by the way. There's the Penobscot Nation Clinic. There's Sapayak, which is near Perry, Maine. And there's the more northern site, which is near Eastport, Maine. Both of these are Passamaquoddy. There's a Maliseet site that's in Holton, Maine, and a Mi'kmaq site that's in Presque Isle, Maine. And then the urban center in Bangor, Maine. And Bangor, by the way, is about there. So when we began, there was one program on Penobscot Nation. And at the present moment, there are MAT programs in all the communities except for the Mi'kmaq, and they have proximity to non-tribal MAT programs within a 20-minute drive. So although we still hope to have tribal influenced and directed programs in all communities. And this was the capacity when we began, and the capacity now is 30. We went from 0 to 30 people in the urban center. Penobscot had around 30 and is up to 60. The two Passamaquoddy sites together have around 20 people. The Maliseet site around 20 people. And a number of people are getting private services at the Mi'kmaq site. So just to say a little bit about modification of counseling using two-eyed seeing. So we stress the importance of the talking circle, which is a means of communication in Indigenous cultures. And it's the idea that people talk until they're done without interruption. And typically there's a talking stick or staff. Whomever holds it holds the floor and passes it to their left in some cultures or to their right in other cultures, depending on the way the community does things in that vicinity. So we also have the idea of working with the spirit of a substance. And this idea that sorcery, which is a bad thing, is taking a substance without knowing its songs and rituals. And so there's a story that if you're going to take something, if you're going to work with a medicine, you need to know its being, you need to know its spirit. And if you don't, bad things could happen. So also the importance of stories and narrative and of involving elders at every level. So what are some aspects of this modified counseling? One is dialogue with the spirit of the addiction, dialoguing with the spirit of the substance with which the person is addicted. Also, the importance of cultural practices, including songs, language, prayers, ceremony, art, and such. The importance of community participation at all levels. The acknowledgement of the effect of the addiction on the entire community, including future generations. We ask the question, whom would you want to be the addict among your grandchildren if you don't stop this today, if you don't break the chain? And narrative medicine has proven to be important in the work that we're doing. So conventional medicine often forgets the importance of listening to the person's story. And so learning how to get the story and to work with the story is an art. And it often involves difficult, painful, traumatic life stories and how to incorporate those into a more healthy framework. So, and you're seeing pictures of ceremonial grounds, ceremonial fires here in the background. But, our sense is that when people are only considered in accordance with their diagnosis and not their stories, that we lose the person and we lose the community and context in which the problem arose. So everyone has a story to explain their addiction, and we need to hear that story. And we need to work with that story to make a difference. So what's next? 2 days before you hear this presentation, we will have cut the ribbon on our new treatment center for Maine's 5 tribes. And there we will integrate culture and Indigenous knowledge with best practices addiction treatment. And we will be engaged in research on how this comes about, outcomes, and how we can engage in this two-eyed seeing approach to addictions treatment, and hope to be able to present even more exciting information to you at next year's CFHA. So thank you for listening. We'll stop now so we can have a few minutes of discussion. And